From Nutrien Ag Solutions, this is Senior Meteorologist Andrew Pritchard with your Canadian Prairie weather story for Monday, February 14th, 2022. Happy Valentine's Day. I hope you love what I've got to tell you here with your forecast over the next couple of weeks across the prairie. Now, some people maybe not loving the cold temperatures beginning to encroach back on the prairie here as we head through the next 5 to 10 days. We've seen some of that colder air be pushed off to the east. Mild temperatures expanding across Alberta, Saskatchewan at times trying to nudge into Manitoba. The cold winning a little bit more as we work off toward the east. But as we head through the next 5 to 10 days, we're going to see this colder air begin to spread back across the prairie. Now, as we look at the infrared satellite picture, you can see the very cold air mass here, the very cold ground being picked up by the infrared satellite picture. You can also see our next little disturbance sliding in here. We've got that ridge continuing to dominate across the Pacific. Systems coming up over the top of that ridge right now, and we're seeing some precipitation spread across portions of central and southern Alberta, southwest Saskatchewan, light and scattered precipitation. So this is not a widespread heavy snowfall event, but likely seeing some scattered snow flurries, maybe some rain showers across portions of central and southern Alberta into southwest Saskatchewan here this Monday morning. And as we look at the NAM model, we'll track this thing across the prairie over the next 24 hours. So here's your midday Monday. Again, scattered light snowfall across the region, kind of along and south of Highway 16 across Alberta into southwest Saskatchewan. And then as we head through the overnight, we'll see the rest of this system eject across the prairie, making its way over the Rockies. So here's your, this is early Tuesday morning, around sunrise Tuesday morning now. Light snow across central and southern Alberta, fading in those areas, beginning to spread across southern Saskatchewan, and then on into southern Manitoba as we get later into the day on Tuesday. So here you go. This is late Monday, Monday night, Tuesday morning, and now Tuesday evening. The system scoots on off to the west as we head to Tuesday night. Another little clipper makes its way in here as we get into Wednesday, maybe some light flurries across southern Alberta during the day on Wednesday. Generally quiet conditions, though, Tuesday and Wednesday, quiet and cold, with the next organized system making its way over the Rockies as we get into Thursday and Friday. So from the NBM, total snowfall between now and Friday evening, heaviest along and north of Highway 16. That's where it's most likely we'll see 5 to 15 centimeters of snow. South of there, across southern Alberta into far southwest Saskatchewan, a little bit lighter snowfall, scattered amounts here, maybe up to 5 centimeters or so, but generally going to be on the light and disappointing side over the next 3 to 4 days. Now, as we look at the 10-day precipitation anomaly forecast from the European ensemble, the pattern really becomes pretty clear. You see the big dry spot there. Go ahead and draw a blue H over there. That is your high that's been sitting over the Pacific. And we get clockwise flow around this big ridge of high pressure. So storm systems, jet stream support doing something like that. It follows then. We see the green corridor there, the heavier precipitation, continuing to come up through Alaska and then kind of dive northwest to southeast. This has been our storm track over essentially, the last 3 to 4 weeks. And so we've been looking for this pattern to kind of break down and looking for a more active, a little more robust moisture providing storm track across southern Alberta, southwest Saskatchewan. So what's the jet stream doing right now? Well, here's the background state. Again, big ridge. We got a trough off across the Hudson Bay, so flow coming over the ridge, getting squeezed between the trough, and we end up with this northwest to southeast storm track across the prairie. Now, this is what we've got as we head through the next 5 to 10 days. We'll go ahead and put this into motion. Here's the system that's impacting the prairie now. You see it kind of slide in across this region. It dives in across the Pacific Northwest. It then kind of recurves off to the north as it gets into portions of the central and eastern United States. And meanwhile, we continue to reinforce the ridge just off to the west of the prairie. Now, another system digs in here late week into the weekend. This one coming in here maybe Saturday into Sunday. This one additionally, I should say, could bring some additional moisture to portions of the prairie that are desperate for that. Speaking on behalf of southern Alberta and southwest Saskatchewan, we'll take this a little further. And then we see that, maybe we're eroding the ridge a little bit. Maybe we're trying to eat into that a little bit. And so I wanted to take another look at what's the ideal pattern here as we come out of February into March if we wanted to produce a lot of snow or a lot of precipitation across southern Alberta and southwest Saskatchewan. So what I did was I took a look at, from 1970 on, the top 8 most active, wettest Februaries and Marches across southern Alberta, southwest Saskatchewan. And we end up with an upper level pattern like this. Big expansive trough across Canada with the ridge much further off to the west. So we've seen the ridge kind of parked right here with the flow doing something like that. The ideal pattern would be shifting this ridge, 500 miles off to the west so that the flow is doing something like this. Instead of cutting directly across the prairie, we've got that flow and that storm track off to the west of the prairie. The difference when we do that is we're looking at 850 millibar winds, so a little lower. We're looking at our kind of our lower level winds, the wind vectors there, and I'm going to draw in the Rocky Mountain range here. And if I take that off, what you do, you look at the arrows here, and this is where kind of our low-level flow is what our low-level flow is doing. And you see with this trough, we get a backing of the winds. And what I mean here is easterly winds coming up against the Rockies. And so we get that upslope flow, and we're able to kind of back some of that moisture and deposit it over southern Alberta, southwest Saskatchewan. Now, if this is not making sense, then here's the precipitation pattern with that. Let's take a look at what we've had. So here's 500 millibar, our height anomaly pattern for January 2022. Again, big ridge, not over here. Instead, it's kind of centered right here on the west coast of the Pacific coast here with Canada and the United States. Where's that trough? It's kind of squeezed over here over the Hudson Bay. So the trough is not taking up, the entirety of Canada. It's way over here. So we end up with, as I showed you, that storm track kind of knifing from northwest to southeast straight across the prairie. So then your winds, your low-level winds, you've got the Rockies, are coming up and over the top of the Rockies here, and you end up with that rain shadow effect across southern Alberta and southwest Saskatchewan. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, here you go. Orographic lifting. We end up taking that Pacific moisture, lifting it, depositing it on the west side of British Columbia, on the western side of the Rockies. The flow then comes up and over the top of that, and we get downward, downslope flow across. Just imagine this is southern Alberta and southwest Saskatchewan. We end up with kind of sinking motion, and we wring out all the moisture there. And so we end up with these, windy and kind of mild conditions across the prairie where all the snow, hey, it's missing us off to the north or missing us off to the east, and we're just getting left out to dry. It's because it's been a very unfavorable storm track, and one where we simply take all the moisture out of the storm systems before we swing it in through southern Alberta, southwest Saskatchewan. And so very, very clearly, the pattern is illustrated here when we look at total snowfall or total snow cover across North America. And then here's your last 30 days of precipitation. Again, just you leave a lot to be desired, even though it's rather active. But the storm track, again, wringing that moisture out instead of depositing on the prairie. So again, we want to shift the ridge off to the west, be bringing storm systems in here such that they're kind of tracking more to the south, so that flow coming around the area of low pressure backs up against the Rocky Mountains here. We deposit more of that moisture right here. We get some of the support from the Rockies instead of the detriment of the Rockies, where again, here's the ideal track. Heavy snow deposited across southern Alberta, southwest Saskatchewan. This is what we've had. Storm track coming up here, flow coming around the areas of low pressure. Again, orographic lifting. A lot of big words here for a Monday morning. We dry the systems out, and we leave southern Alberta, southwest Saskatchewan on the dry side. So here's the European weeklies, the most recent forecast. Unfortunately, we'll get another one here later today, so I wish I had the newest data for you, but here's the flow. Over the top of the ridge, northwest to southeast across the prairie. Not a favorable storm track here across southern Alberta, southwest Saskatchewan. Over the next 30 days, the ridge starts to move off to the west. We start to expand that trough. If I go ahead and just pause it here with what the weeklies are advertising, as we get into the middle of March, that's about textbook there. Again, this would have systems swinging in here across the prairie with a much better trajectory to bring in some moisture across the prairie. And so it follows then as we just animate this. It's not a real strong signal because there's a lot of uncertainty in here. How many systems do we get? What is the actual, how do the specifics really play out as we get into that? But the bigger key here is just looking at the trend. As we just play this out, you start to see some of the dryness across the western US and western Canada start to get peeled back there as we get into the early part of March, going on into mid and then potentially late March. So it's out there a bit. The next 5 days not going to be very favorable. Days 5 to 10 maybe a little more favorable as we look at the European or the operational run here, the precipitation forecast. Here's your Monday, Tuesday system, again swinging in across the region, bringing some light snow here over the next 48 hours. Generally going to be a quiet Wednesday, maybe some flurries here as high pressure swings in across the prairie. We'll get some winds coming up against the mountains here to provide some light flurries on Wednesday across Alberta. Not going to be a heavy snow, but then here comes our next system late week as we get into Thursday and Friday. And then the European model a little more optimistic, where it just kind of keeps systems going here as we allow the trough to expand. The ridge may be getting pushed off to the west. If we can just keep this corridor active, it'll become increasingly favorable here to start depositing some of that moisture across this region. So I'm curious how the weekend plays out. It could overachieve in some portions of southern Alberta, southwest Saskatchewan, and then we'll watch next week into the week that follows that for a more large-scale pattern shift. So as we look at the next 10 days, again, the European model a little more optimistic, I should say, across this entire corridor from southern Alberta into the northern plains of the U.S., whereas the GFS kind of leaving this area out. That is largely this weekend into early next week, where the Euro and the GFS not agreeing. So curious about the weekend here into early next week. If the European wins, there could be some happy folks across southern Alberta, southwest Saskatchewan, with some overachieving snowfall from a series of systems that swing in here. And then we'll look to the first week of March maybe for that more large-scale pattern shift. Now, I mentioned temperatures again. Unfortunately, the cold is on its way back in. If you want to look at the bright side there, that is part of the overall transition that would potentially return a more favorable storm track to the Canadian Prairie. So here you go. You see the big area of cold. We would want to get that ridge pushed off to the west, get that storm track doing something like this instead of this. Your next 10 days in Calgary, again, a little on the mild side over the next 5 days or so. Cold begins to encroach, though, this weekend and beyond. Edmonton, here is Saskatoon, Regina, and then Winnipeg. I hope that wasn't too confusing here for a Monday morning. Just wanted to kind of take a look at what would be ideal here if we want to turn the precipitation back on and kind of deposit some last-minute snowfall across the prairie before we head on into spring. And as you know, has been the case, there is hope in weeks 2 to 3. We're just going to have to continue to watch things. And, again, be curious about this weekend. See if maybe we can overachieve just a little bit. Have a wonderful Monday and a great week.